Hello, everyone. This is Kate Stillman with the Yoga Health Coaching Podcast, and I'm here with Shoshana, CoachShosh.com. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's actually Koch, Koch, Koch.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So CoachShosh.com is Shoshana's site, and you came into Yoga Health Coaching how long ago? Not too long ago.
I'm the August 2019 cohort. So I started in the beginning of August.
Okay. And did you start Body Thrive then in May?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sweet.
And I did Spring Yogi Detox prior to Body Thrive in May, which is what segued me into Body Thrive.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So some funnel's working. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Marketing.
It worked because I was like, what's the lowest bar entry program here? Let me check this out. And then I was like, this is really high quality. So I can, I wanted to feel it out. Yeah. And it was great. So I moved forward.
What's funny though, to me is like, we've known each other really less than a year for you as a coach, as a course member, but I feel like I've known you for years.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think we have some shared DNA or genetic something. Because I've heard you allude to being of Jewish descent at some point. Yep.
I've got the Ashkenazi Jewish lineage in there somewhere, along with a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, same. And then my son, when he sees the back of Body Thrive, he's like, that looks like you.
Oh, interesting. Like, I got the dark eyebrows. I got the dark hair.
I'm like, actually, we do have some similar similar features.
Yeah.
So that might be part of it. Perhaps we did know each other another time.
So when you came into, I know it, like, as I've gotten to know you through the process of YHC mostly, I guess Body Thrive too, because a lot comes up for wellness pros as they're going through Body Thrive and aligning their habits and discovering, just habit evolution science as they're applying it to themselves and their families and their homes. And I think too, part of the reason I feel like I've known you for a while is you were all in, like you showed up in a way that was not putting on airs, which can be very hard for wellness pros to do, is just to be themselves, to be vulnerable, to be in a learner mindset, which is kind of ironic that it can be hard to do. But it can be, and you weren't. Like, you were transparent and open and able to tell people part of your story. And in the process in yoga health coaching, you became more and more able to start writing your story, seeing it as a service. So this is when, like, marketing really becomes a service to other people, and when sales also becomes a service to other people, because by owning who you have become in the process of becoming, it helps people connect to maybe where they are not quite where you are yet, and they're aspiring to where you are now, and just to hear parts of the story along the way. So the parts about your story that are, I would say, uncommon in yoga health coaching is really having to parent yourself, essentially, is the way that I heard it, and in the challenges that arise for people that are found themselves in similar situations with their birth family, and not having parents that were responsible, and having to go through the healing process from that. So do you want to just talk a little bit about your process in finding the power in your story and your ability to share your story?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I've always had that impulse to craft something out of my experience. So that the creative impulse, that Shakti, that energy. I was thinking about, because I thought you may ask about the writing and sharing of story, and I was thinking about, like, my first poems were like basically once I started to learn how to write words, right? It was like I started creating imagery and imagination. So thinking about, like, how much that was for me, that was such a resiliency factor. And they say that, when they, like in research for people with high ACE scores, which is adverse childhood experiences. And mine's the highest it can be. It's like a 10, which is the highest it can be. And it's a list of things, you know, and it ranges from like, did people get divorced in your family to did people commit suicide in your family? And so creativity is a huge resiliency factor, and just imagination, ability to just that escapism, and I think meaning making, and also having one attachment figure, which for me was my grandfather. So he was a hot mess too, but he was less of a mess than the parental figures. And we were really tight. And he, having that is a resiliency factor, even in the chaos. And so I feel like, point of saying that is just from a really young age, I feel like that's been a driving force or an impulse, is to make meaning and express and share, which I didn't do for a really long time when I got into my own addiction, because it's like it's a stifling of self-expression. It's like misled seeking of experience. You know,
say
like
more about that.
Yeah, like somebody was telling me about this, and I thought that is exactly what it is. That often using mind altering substances, the intention is we're seeking an experience, whether it's like transcendence, insight, deeper connection, belonging. But then it becomes its own monster, because you briefly get a glimpse into that experience, perhaps with all these consequences and the fallout, and you have to continue doing it to touch into that.
Right.
It's not coming from within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point, so in terms of telling people a little bit about your story, when did you realize that you were in, you know, as far as like the ACE scores go, like when did you figure out that not everybody was having the same experience of you, and that you, I mean, maybe this wasn't the same thing as figuring out when you needed help, or when you needed to seek other, you know, inputs into your world. Yeah. So give people a little bit of background of like what it was like to grow up.
Yeah. Oh, just very like, I mean, really, it was just such a shame-based childhood, you know, like it was, we were really invisible. We were a burden. We were in the way.
We as the children.
Yes. So kind of as one often sees in like these types of family systems, my mother and aunt really ran together because they needed to pool their resources to live this addicted lifestyle. And so my aunt,
what were they addicted to?
Heroin, and as well as other things. But that was, I mean, when you're addicted to heroin, that's your drug of choice. That's, you know, you're gonna get sick if you don't have it. So
and when did your mom start using? How old was she?
Oh man. So, you know, trauma begets trauma. My mom had a horrific childhood and upbringing. And so she started using when she was like similar to me, probably like 12, 13 is when she started with pot and alcohol. And then that progressed to hallucinogenics and stimulants. And then that progressed to barbiturates and different pills. And then that progressed to heroin.
And so when was she on heroin by?
I think that she began using heroin probably she had me when she was 25, and she wasn't using it then. She was using other things. Although to her credit, she would stop when she was pregnant. She said she would sometimes smoke weed, but she would stop drinking. She'd stop all the other stuff. So that's helpful. Yeah. I would say early 30s. Yeah.
Okay. So you're going to first grade and doing heroin.
Yeah, definitely by kindergarten. Yeah. And you know, so it was this, I always, when you said like, you said something along the lines of when did I realize that my experience was different?
Yeah.
I feel like I always knew it. I feel like I was kind of haunted by a sense of like,
Was that from like watching Sesame Street or TV or something and seeing like, oh, that it's different at my house?
that, and some of my peer relationships had like seemingly normal, stable families.
Okay.
And so like going over and like doing dinner with them, which we never did, was like it was just a very stark contrast to my experience. Mm-hmm.
And how would that make you feel? Like going to more of like a Leave It to Beaver. Like I'm sure my house growing up would have been like a Leave It to Beaver house.
Yeah, it was a really ambivalent thing. I think I mostly really liked it because there was a sense of refuge and safety and stability. Like, you know, I had a sense that nobody was going to bust into the room and start screaming and throwing furniture. I had a sense that things were going to be normal, you know, quiet, stable. So I would try to be in those environments, honestly, as much as possible. And frequently I mean, like, it sounds like something out of a TV show or something, but I was the house that parents didn't let their kids go to because there was just this, I mean, you could just tell I was the kind of kid where you could tell visibly by looking at me that I was like neglected, something was wrong, you know?
What were the signs?
Well, the classic one is, and this is real, I wore the same Guns N' Roses t-shirt to kindergarten for like months. And it was like, you know, like an adult's appetite for destruction, Guns N' Roses t-shirt.
Not Elmo.
Not Elmo. And, you know, like reeking of cigarette smoke and just kind of those signs of like, this is a kid that something's going on and something's
So when was the first intervention where someone said something?
Yeah, so it was actually, it's funny. I knew you would do this. I was like, I said it to my husband. I was like, well, the other reason I'm a little nervous is she's going to ask like, you know, thought-provoking, challenging questions. Like, she's not going to say, what's your favorite color? And he's like, yeah, well, that's probably why you enjoy working with her. So the first time was actually, I wrote a short story about it called Slipping. And it was about, my mom had picked me up from school and then she'd gone to COP, which means get drugs. And I think it was some type of, when barbiturates were still around, it was definitely a downer. It was not heroin, but it was a downer of some sort. And so we're waiting in the car and she's nodding out and the car starts to roll backwards. And I'm probably in like first grade wearing a DARE t-shirt. I'll never forget that. So I had a different t-shirt on that day.
So for people who are not Americans who are listening, what is DARE?
Oh my God, help me. Drugs against help. I don't know what the acronym is. To the internet.
Okay, we're gonna have to.
Yeah, I forgot.
What is it? It's like a
drugs.
Yeah, it's like Dare to Care. So it's like basically like a just say no.
Yes, it's a just say no.
It's Nancy Reagan era. 1980s or late 80s, early 90s.
So DARE is Drug Abuse Resistance Education, DARE.
So here you are. Your mom's on the way to get barbiturates. Yeah. You're wearing a DARE t-shirt. You're not on brand. Okay. You're not in your Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, not in my Guns N' Roses. So actually it got pretty dark though. So I was trying to basically revive her to put the car into park because she had it in neutral and we were on this incline.
And you're how old?
Like literally like first grade, like very young. And the
car's literally slipping and that's why it's the name of the story.
Yes. Yeah. And so a pedestrian came by and was like, are you guys okay? Because I was crying and she's like asleep. And she just was, and then he somewhat was reviving her, and she was belligerent and saying, get the fuck away. Oh, can I curse? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't remember. So
We're not
anyway,
supposed to.
yeah. So the cops are called, the cops come, they arrest her. So I'm in the front seat of the car, she's put in the back with the cage, and by now she's very awake and she's screaming and kicking, and it's like she fought the police officer. It was a whole thing. It was horrible. And that was the second time I was put in foster care. The first time I was a baby, and I have no memory of it. But
and then she would get custody of you again. Like she would do.
Yeah.
She would. Yeah.
Both times she was able to obtain custody again through, it was like you need to drop clean UAs for a month and do this class once a week, and then you can have your kid back, kind of thing. But the biggest takeaway from that experience was actually when we were driving away. So I was in foster care that time for maybe 6 weeks total. And we're driving away, and I know like it's over, like I'm going home now. And it was that bizarre experience that children in abusive families have where I was frightened of her and she was a threat, but she was also my mom. Like, so she's all I knew. My dad wasn't on the scene. So it was also really, I had a lot of grief in that separation and fear because she was all I knew. So there was this kind of excitement and hope at returning to mom. But as we were leaving, she turned to me, we're like in the car, and she said, "Do you know why you were in there for so long? Like why you were in that foster care placement for so long?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Because you told them that we had plants in the house." Because she grew weed in the house. And they showed me pictures of things, and I was just being honest. I was like first grader. So
talking to the cops. Yep.
But like, that's an example. That's the kind of stuff she would do. It's like, I'm going to absolve myself of any ownership or responsibility, and I'm going to
blame my 6-year-old.
Yeah, I'm going to put it right back on my 6-year-old.
So you wrote a story, and that's when, with the slipping, that was the story.
Yeah, that was a short story about that exact experience that day. And
when did you write that?
I wrote that in college. So I actually went to Sarah Lawrence College in New York for writing. That's why I went there.
Wow.
Yeah. Alice Walker went there, and she is one of my favorite authors. And I was like, I want to go to a place where people like that learned how to write.
And so how has writing been therapeutic for you? And telling, because you're, I mean, and now you're a wellness pro, right? So you have your online course, Be Rhythm, Heal Your Body, Ignite Your Power. Like you're helping other people heal. Obviously, people that have a history of trauma can really connect. And you found the power of your voice and writing and your ability to share your story, which is huge, right? Because so many people stuff their stories and then people can't connect with them. And it's kind of it's kind of sad, right? Where they're like trying to help people, but they can't put their story into packets, right? If we look at whether it's a social media post or a book, they're packets that enable interaction and connection. Engagement is what it's called now in social media, right? They allow people to engage, and they allow, like, we look at engagement every week now of like who's engaging with what, like what's actually enabling connection is the way that I see engagement. And so you've really done a ton of work in helping your voice, process, heal, and allowing other people to connect.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that it's, I'm trying to avert a lost legacy, like I don't want this to go to waste. Like, I don't believe, I just don't believe that, that shit happens, and that's that. like we can make something of it, and there's deep meaning and connection and potential in our stories, and they help people. I mean, stories like The Liars Club, Mary Carr, The Glass Castle, Jeanette Walls, like these stories cracked me open. Like I was like, okay, so you can have these experiences and you can create beauty out of it and give that to the world. And that is such a like alchemy of that trauma and suffering. It's such a transformation of it.
And to see what they became, right? Like just see like, oh, that transcending, like telling the story allows us to transcend the story, because then it becomes an it and not an I.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's, you know, I read something about karma that Pema Chodron wrote, and it was because I had this real dark night of the soul and a few years back, and I was reminded of how it's not about good and bad, and you know, because I really had I mean, it's a whole nother story, but it was when my son was born and he had lots of medical issues, and I really had a crisis of faith, and like I felt
what were his medical
exiled.
issues, just so people can connect?
Yeah, so he was born at 26 weeks gestation. Yeah, which is 2 weeks from viability. And so he was 1 pound, 10 ounces, NICU for 5 months, 20 surgeries. It was insane. So he's fine now, which is amazing and wonderful, and we're very grateful. It's a really long road, but it was when that happened that I really felt like cast out by the divine. You know, I felt it's just such a crisis of faith. I just felt like I must have been somebody who like beheaded children in a past life, because I can't believe I'm getting hit with this. And
like kind of it hasn't been enough. Like haven't I?
Yeah.
Right. Like didn't I pull my share already?
That's how it felt. That's how it felt. It's like I just wanted to be a mom. Like how hard can that be?
Yeah.
And so it was during that I dug into some of the teachings about karma, and this passage that Pema Chodron wrote is really about life giving you the teachings you need to keep opening your heart to connect with the world and others. And like, that's the Bodhisattva path. So yeah, it felt like, okay, you know, this is not about, I did a bad thing, so I'm getting a bad thing. It's not how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was powerful.
So in your healing practice now, in your coaching practice, how much is creative writing or storytelling part of it? Or are you going somewhere in that direction?
Yeah, well, you've helped me immensely with that piece in terms of identity evolution and stepping into Dharma. And I've already pre-ordered your book. Super excited about it. And, you know, I was originally going to do Awake Living, and then I switched it up to YHC. And I'm happy I did. But, you know, Awake Living is very appealing to me because of that deep work on Dharma.
Yeah.
And so that is going to be a prominent feature of what I continue to do, is the creative writing and sharing my story. And, you know, the goal is to write a book one day. I need to work on my specificity around that.
Yeah. Well, you're coming to a live event, so we'll move forward fast in that direction. So, I mean, one of the things that I'm fascinated too by is art therapy, right? And if we look at writing or that creative process, and, you know, whether we're using words or images or whatever, to me, I'm just going to put it all under the umbrella of art therapy, that there's something when I look at it from a yogic perspective, where we look at like, we're completely free to create, right? Like some of the higher experiences of yoga is where we awaken to that, like who we are is unbridled, like who we are is we are consciousness, and the universe that we live in is clothed in the 5 elements, and we can make what we want with them.
Yeah.
Right. And our imagination is really like the boundary, right? Like, so in our connection to the impulse, the desire to make something, and a desire to imagine and make stuff. So, and when we're doing that, we feel people lose time. So what's fascinating, right, about like, if we look at the creative process or art therapy or whatever we want to call it, there's the flow state that naturally happens. And part of the flow state is that we're highly engaged.
Yeah.
We're relaxed, and we lose track of time. There's a sense of timelessness in it. And all of these things are like part of, you know, what if we look at like how humans how they want to experience, like how we want to experience our moments, it's in flow. It's in those, we want to have more and more of those experiences. And one of the things I've noticed with yoga health coaches over time is when we give them the framework of the annual pass of like, you're going to sell one thing, like put all the things into the one thing that you can guide people through over time. There's been a huge surgence of bringing in art therapy, of like bringing that part in. And so it's not just about coaching, and it's not just, you know, it's not just about the habits, and it's not just about you know, helping people poop every day at the same time and become pooping champions, right? Like, but like in the process of all of this transformation, there's a very deeply therapeutic value to people creating something, like just for, and not for the sake of what we produce, but for the sake of being in production. Yeah. Being in it. Yeah. So I am really curious to see it, you know, because you're so fresh, right? Like you're only 6 months in, 8 months in, or something like that, or 6 months in. Like what conversation we'll have in a year, and how you're bringing your own people through in your annual pass with, you know, with their own storytelling and their own creative process. Yes. Yeah, 100%. All of that. I love the whole study of flow states and how creativity just perfectly synchronizes with that. It is a flow. It is a flow activity, 100%. Yeah. And yeah, now hearing you say that, I used to facilitate healing. I called it healing words, I think. For a treatment center I worked at, and I would do writing prompts with the women, and they loved it. It was great. And yeah, I have to remember, like, I can pull that, I can integrate that into my offering. Yes. And it'll just, I'll enjoy it and they'll enjoy it. You can even bring it into marketing, right? Where it's like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to process some trauma. Yeah. And we're going to do this through a creative writing process. And it's not just going to be heavy. It's also going to be light. Like we're going to go towards the light. Right. Yeah. And gives people a really unique experience, and however you want to do it. Right. Yeah. I like that a lot. Not sure why I haven't considered that. See, this is why it'll be so good to do the workshop. I'm so excited for Mexico, because it's like I know there's going to be a lot of insights and ahas. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I guess what I'm curious about next is with your experience in Body Thrive, you know, just coming through with whatever expectations that you had of body. Like often people are a little surprised that we make everybody go through Body Thrive before they can go into, I think it's great, awake living or living Ayurveda or yoga health coaching. And it's like, no, we're just going to get you dialing in your habits, building a reservoir of energy that'll make us more resilient and more adaptable. So what were some of your ahas, especially in relation to your childhood, going through Body Thrive? Yeah. Well, and as a mother too. So I just want to, because it's such a thing, like habits are so familial, right? It's kind of where I'm. Yeah. Well, on that note, I would just like to say that since practicing
Haven't fully been able to do neti pot. I got him a little one, but we do nasal wash and we do nausea every single day. And my kid does not get sick. It's crazy. Like he just started kindergarten. So that's a whole big school system that he's just entered.
Right.
He got a small cold the first like week, and that was September, and nothing since then. And this is also a kid who had significant respiratory issues.
I was going to say, he had a health history coming in, right?
Major health history coming in. So it's been phenomenal in that regard. My husband as well is a high school social studies teacher, so he frequently gets sick, lots of exposure. This season, like we've all just been, it's been great. And I attribute it to the habits. I attribute it to like what's different this season. Oh, I'm doing these small habits with both my child and my husband that are building OJAS and protecting their systems.
Yeah.
You know?
Huge.
And so, and the implications of that, like less antibiotics, less work time off. I mean, it's such a ripple effect of what that means to stay well.
Right.
And
right. Just talk to any family that's been chronically sick for a month and you'll be like, oh, there's a different reality going on there.
Yeah. And I think the habits for me in terms of how is that in contrast to my upbringing is just, I never witnessed people take care of themselves. It was not in the repertoire of things that were happening at all. You know, it was look for drugs, get drugs, do drugs, crash, recover from the drugs, look for drugs, get drugs, do drugs. You know what I mean? Like it just was that cycle over and over again. I never saw my mom like take a bath or write in a journal or go for a walk. It just was not a thing. And so attuning to, the reason I called my group B Rhythm is A, I love dancing and music, and B, it's all about attuning to the biorhythms and like the rhythms of the cosmos, and that is within us. And when we get in sync, we thrive. We live our best life. And so I've really felt that I had some of the habits pretty dialed in prior to, which I'm we've talked about that you encounter that, especially with wellness pros. Like I was already a sleep zealot when I started, so that one was super easy. I was like, check. I love sleeping, and it's not excess. I like to go to bed early and get up early. I feel the best that way. But things like much more consistent, and the meditating's been huge. So, and applying habit evolution to that and Kaizen has transformed my sitting in stillness, my meditation practice, So I was somebody that, so I'm 38 and I've been on the path since I was about 20. And I feel like I have had a meditation practice, but I always had this rigidity of like, it needs to be 20 minutes in the morning and the evening, and it needs to look like this. And if it doesn't, then I'm half-assing it, and And so as a result, it was very erratic. Like I would do it for a few weeks and then I wouldn't do it. And then I'd go on a retreat and I'd be really inspired again. And then I'd do it. And, whereas now I do it every day, and it's about 15 minutes, but it's every day for months. Wow. And that's been, to me, that and movement are keystone habits for sure. Yeah. When those are dialed in, it's everything benefits.
So for the yoga health coaches who are listening, and some of them might be working with people that have had a huge history of addiction, maybe even with things like heroin, even meth. I've had clients before that had periods of their life where they were on it. What are your, I guess, approach or just perspectives? Because I think sometimes it's shocking for people who really grew up in more of like the Leave It to Beaver household to be like, oh, right. Like some people do meth and then they end up in my yoga health coaching group because they've actually, evolved their lives in other ways. Or people that we know in yoga health coaching, a lot of people actually end up with people that are drinking too much alcohol very regularly and for very many years, or addicted to weed, things that are like these sort of like socially acceptable sort of gray areas where like is the person an alcoholic? It's like, no, but they drink a bottle of wine every night, like whatever that means, you know what I mean? And then what I know from coaching Body Thrive since 2012, is usually around Q3. So it's a year-long program. So about 6 months in, a certain percentage of people will realize that they're drinking too much and that they can't drink, or they're smoking weed and they can't go any deeper on their path of integrity and keep the substance. Right. And so it's interesting. A certain percentage will just go cold turkey. And I've seen the pattern. It's like not in Q1, Q2, they're like kind of asking some different questions around, this might not be good for me. And then like Q3, they're like, I'm just going to take a quarter off.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just going to see what it's like to not have that in my system and see what else happens in my life. And then in Q4, there can be a number of things that happen. Either they continue the experiment or they find a new sense of right relationship, which is very different than where they started in Q1. Yeah. So there's a level of like, we don't focus on addiction in or I don't in my course, I don't focus directly on addiction at all. Yeah. But I have this thing of like falling into rhythm, right? Like other things will fall into rhythm, whether it's eating addiction, shopping addiction, too much drugs, alcohol, etc. And there's more of an indirect way of like letting people find their own integrity gaps through other habits becoming grounded. Then the things that are out of sync get highlighted, right? It's like all of a sudden there's this huge spotlight on these things that are just really out of integrity. And for some people, it's just like not getting to the meditation cushion or not really finishing eating by a certain time and then snacking at night. Like something will just like all of a sudden this thing that like really wasn't even on the radars all of a sudden has this huge spotlight from 10 miles away, like driving all attention and traffic to this thing. So I was just, I was just curious for you with having gone through a lot of, just having a life history that's so full of substance abuse by other people, and then your own forays into substance abuse and recovery. And
yeah, and I'm also a licensed alcohol drug counselor in addition to being a psychotherapist. So, it's like a whole nother, like I went and studied and got that degree because I happened to just land in a treatment center as my first job out of graduate school. Huh. Isn't that funny? Yeah. And it was family treatment. So it was specifically women who had CPS, Child Protective Services involvement, and were at risk for losing their children if they didn't get clean. So yes, I have been very immersed in that world in all the ways you just said, and as well as professionally. And a couple things just came to mind when you were describing sort of the progression that people seem to go through in the quarters. It really reminded me of stages of change in motivational interviewing and in chemical dependency settings. This model's used a lot, and it's like pre-contemplation is the first stage, right? Where the person's like, there's no problem here. What are you talking about? Everybody does this. Yeah.
Let's go drink some wine.
Yeah. Like this is not a thing. And then and then they move into contemplation, which is like, they're like, that's the like pings they start getting, and like these intuitive hits of like, maybe something's up here. Maybe this isn't what I thought it was. Maybe something's wrong. Yeah. And then they go into action, which is like maybe they start looking at programs or they start researching options for help. And then action can also look like they are then in that program or working with that coach.
Right.
And then maintenance is continuing to do the things that help you stay the course. And then relapse is part of that cycle of the stages of change.
And what's relapse defined as? Like, well, is it complete relapse, or is it like maybe re-engagement with the substance, but at a totally different level of saturation?
Yeah. I think that could potentially be actually more maintenance if the person is able to, like the words you used were get in right relationship with the substance.
Right.
Or, that they're able to moderate and find that they're not struggling with preoccupation or cravings or issues like that.
Yeah.
And then they're in maintenance. I wouldn't consider that relapse.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But relapse could be an epic relapse. They're like off to the races again and they've got to start the process over. Or it could just be a slip and then they go right back to maintenance by reaching out and getting help.
It's like Body Thrive over the holidays. Like all these people realize that like overeating doesn't work yet again. And they're like, okay, they go from relapse to maintenance really quick. They're like,
yeah. And then that it's not linear, that you can bounce around. Like people will shoot between pre-contemplation and contemplation for a while. They'll go back and forth.
Yeah. So I mean, often one of the things that I see with, I would say, newer yoga health coaches or people that are with less experience working with people over time. And that's like the big benefit of the yoga health coaching model and the annual pass is like you have a chunk of time, people are financially invested, you're invested to deliver results, like get your people to results. That there's just a better time frame than just this, sort of like non-committal drop into yoga class or come to this workshop and that retreat, but there's no like larger container for it.
Yeah.
So I let the container do so much of the work, right? Of like the commitment of the price point and the structure of the group and the structure of the coaching, and then just the saturation over time and the dynamic group methodology of like, you're going to be with people who are growing and changing and understand this language of identity, evolution, and growth mindset and all the things. Like you're going to learn a new language. You're going to be part of a culture that can help you become who you want to become next. And so I don't have to directly address existing substance abuse or try to move people through those stages of pre-contemplation to contemplation to action, right? Because I'm like, let's just see if the process works everyone through what they need to get out of it. And often what I've seen in newer coaches is like, they're trying to point out to the person that they're in wrong relationship with the substance, whether it's internet shopping or overeating or, and it's, and I just like to hear your take on that. And it's like when the student is ready, the teacher appears, or the, that whole thing of like, what is the student teacher relationship as far as action, and like what is it? Like, I think there's an aphorism of like every step a student takes towards a teacher takes 2 steps towards a student. There's something like that. But and I think that it comes from, I think it comes from the Vedic tradition, but I think it comes from the concept of an effort needs to be initiated before help can be received or guidance can be received or deep listening or whatever. Like the student has to initiate the desire to change. They have to be a seeker. They have to be asking the question. You can't help someone that's not asking. I mean, you hear this all the time in addiction stuff. Like, I'd love to help my Uncle Joe stop drinking, but it's like, until Uncle Joe wants to stop drinking, there's nothing you can do to help Uncle Joe.
Totally. Yeah, that makes me think about, I don't know if this addresses the question, but that makes me think about kind of the classic paradigm in therapy is meet the client where they're at. So you have to be able to presence where they currently are versus leading with all of your insights and interpretations and perceptions of where they need to go next.
Yeah,
because that just elicits like resistance usually, or shame.
Denial. Shame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so then you're like, oh God, now we've got like another layer to work through that we just put on them.
Yeah.
In
So this is where
well-intentioned.
yeah, totally
Yeah.
well-intentioned. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like no one's trying to shame anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It brings up to me that like in the whole process of the stories, like of how stories really fit in. Cause often what happens is I will tell some story on some live coaching call about people giving up drinking, like just running an experiment.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I wonder, and maybe telling a few details. And this is where the detail, like in the beginning of this call, right? I was asking you very detailed things about the stories because it's what makes it makes something go from like just like a sketch into something that actually is tangible and relatable and humanizing.
Yes.
Right. And so just by telling a story of, I could tell a story from the last 6 weeks in Body Thrive of 2 people that gave up drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And why, and what they're experiencing, and how the conversations changed with me and them, and how the landscapes changed, and how I'm seeing them showing up differently in the community, and all these things in their lives that are changing because not because they like quit drinking forever. It's just they're running an experiment. So like giving people language, giving people stories, right? Like, and starting to actually build a container for how they see what they could do within that container, to me is like, it's huge.
Yeah. That story about the potency of using the story and the details of it, how compelling that is, versus kind of just like a vague sense of like, yeah, this is just seems to be what happens. It's like, well, what actually happens for the person? What
actually happens for them? I mean, and even in an example of one of our members right now, who she's 60.
I think I know who you're talking about. She's awesome.
Yeah. And she started Body Thrive. She did the yoga detox. She's kind of on your track. She started yoga detox in April, started Body Thrive in May, and now she's in Q3. So she decided to stop drinking wine at night. And now she, like in our last coaching call, she's like, I need to apologize to a lot of people about how controlling I've been in relationships. Like her core relation, like, and this is a new behavior. So this is something, this has never occurred to her to do this. And then we talked on the Body Thrive coaching call a lot about how when we run an experiment, right, how it shifts then how we do things, right? In terms of like how we relate like to our core relationship, which changes the actions of like trying new behaviors in these relationships. And for her, it was this really desire to own her past behavior. Like that's what it was. It's like, I want to own that this is, at least from my own perception, how I've been, and she wanted to apologize. And what was fascinating about the conversation with the members of the group about that is we talked about like what it's like to receive someone's authentic apology. Like, what does that do how does that shift the relationship? How does that whole thing work? And so she got to have this experience of even talking about it. But the point being is it's so real because it's now her story. Yeah. Someone else is thinking like, oh God, I've sort of been an ass. Right?
Yeah. It gives permission. Yeah. That's so powerful. And that to me just really makes me think about identity evolution. Like she's like, I'm a person of integrity and I act as such. And this is how I do that. Yeah. Like I repair, I amend. Yeah.
I mean, and when I look forward to like what will like what she'll be talking about in a year, it's like, it's just going to be so different from the, from the ability to have taken action from having the support of a group that's growing, right?
Yeah.
And being able to run experiments and see.
Yeah, that the quote problems really shift, I imagine, over the course of watching people's trajectory, and like this may be her current struggle and how different that will look in a year.
Yeah. And like the first struggles were all about weight. Just weight, just
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating to see just in culture, and like we do a lot of research on SEO as far as like what content to create next, like what to write about and what to talk
Yep.
about, and all that. And like it's like those surface level things around like weight,
Mm-hmm.
energy, sleep, right? And then they
Mm-hmm.
evolve into these really subtle things of like,
Yeah.
oh wait, maybe this
Yeah.
isn't, maybe I'm putting things in my body that are just like, that was just an old identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And also thinking about, that makes me think about, my response with the stages of change, and like speaking to why people have that, seem to, that you repeatedly have this experience with your participants. It's also, that people start to recognize, man, this doesn't feel good, because there's so much more in tune. There's so much more embodied through the habits, that the residual, like the the ick of doing those things is so much more kind of tangible, or they can access it more. It's like, oh, there's like this repulsion.
Yeah, like the cause and effect of like, I don't like the effect.
Yeah, like I see a very direct correlation here, and I'm enjoying feeling good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I'll take that over feeling like crap.
Right. It must be wild to look back and just see that, and to see the contrast with the crash from heroin, just like being in the extreme of that, because it's like on a scale of subtle to gross, right? Like you were in this really very tangible, or what in Ayurveda we'd use the word gross, like that it was manifest, it was physical, you could see it, smell it, taste it, touch it, hear it, right? And just to see, oh, this feels like this, and then it goes to that, and just the black and whiteness of that pulse. Whereas like, who now in your coaching, who are you working with?
So often it's people that I think have these more, and I don't think you were saying this, but just to clarify, I was actually never addicted to heroin myself, thank God.
Right.
I very intentionally abstained from that one. I tried all the other ones and really had an affinity for a couple of them, but that one I was terrified because of my parents. But yes, witnessing it and directly being in a relationship with it. Currently, most of them have addictions similar to what you said, more socially accepted. You know, it's more the weed and the wine, and it's 4 o'clock somewhere, and all the stuff with our culture around drinking, and also predominantly women. I have a couple male clients. I tend to do better with either men that identify as gay or trans, or are just really sensitive and in touch with their feminine side. We tend to work better together. And definitely people with some trauma history, but that it's such a continuum, and not to say that some traumas, it's not like the trauma wars, like whose trauma is worse, but just that, for some people, a parental divorce at 12 is really devastating, and that can be, to their nervous system, a trauma.
Sure.
And so, and definitely some disordered eating stuff. I briefly worked in eating disorder treatment. That is a difficult population to work with. I did a podcast on, did you hear that one on, for anorexia nervosa? It was good. So it's going to be fascinating for us to watch, like where you go with your annual pass and the people that you bring in, and how you tell your story. I know from reading like Glass Castles, like it was such a, for people to access, like, oh my gosh, that's what some people are growing up with, and to tap into the power of story, and to see too what identity like how identity evolution happens in the steps and stages of how healing works. It's so powerful. I would imagine the more you're telling your story too, the more that you'll attract people that are healing from deep trauma. Yeah, I mean, I think that I know for me that that's, like I said, those stories and those people gave me immense hope and, you know, light in the darkness for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is
Excellent. Well, I'm
fun.
so glad that we've had a chance to get more of your story out, and
Yeah, thank you.
I look forward to where we're going next at a live event and seeing what this book is. Everyone,
Yeah.
this has been Coach Shosh with
Yeah.
CoachShosh.com and Yoga
Yeah.
Health Coaching Podcast. If you're just for people who are interested in talking to someone about what it's like to be in yoga health coaching, go to yogahealthcoaching.com/conversation. And it's not like a slimy, creepy sales conversation. It's really just a conversation about where you want to go in your wellness career, and we'll send you, video trainings, free resources, etc. So it's yogahealthcoaching.com/conversation. Thanks for being a podcast listener.